Some places are simply destinations. Others become dreams. Buenos Aires was a dream destination for Ellen.
For almost 40 years, Buenos Aires was on my bucket list. In 1986, I had two different possibilities to travel there for work. Both times I asked if I could go, and both times I was told it was still too dangerous. But Buenos Aires always stayed on my list. Finally, nearly 40 years later, we decided it was time.
When we planned our trip to Buenos Aires, we expected beautiful architecture, great food, maybe a little tango. But what surprised us were all the little things that made the city feel completely different from what we'd imagined.
Some of these surprises made us laugh.
Some changed the way we viewed Buenos Aires.
And a few even came home with us.
Here are the things that genuinely surprised us about Buenos Aires, Argentina. One of our very first surprises was just how Italian the city feels. We usually heard ciao instead of adios.
Argentina has a huge Italian heritage, but hearing ciao everywhere and hearing Spanish spoken with an Italian accent really made the city feel different from the rest of South America. One of the highlights of our trip was having lunch with my distant cousin Sandra and her husband Jorge.
They took us for lunch to a restaurant called Nápoles in the San Telmo neighborhood. It's a really unique pizza place, and some of the decor is classic cars and vintage motorcycles. But we also learned there that pizza is knife and fork food in Argentina, just like it is in Italy.
We had a great time. The food was delicious, and it was wonderful visiting with relatives that before I'd only communicated with via email and WhatsApp.
After lunch, we all went for a walk through the San Telmo Sunday street market.
Sandra and Jorge pointed out so many fascinating things, and we even got to see a live tango demonstration.
Then they drove us around Buenos Aires, giving us their perspective of the city they love and call home.
They shared stories, pointed out details we never would have noticed, and gave us a much better sense of what everyday life is like in Buenos Aires.
That day, we started seeing Buenos Aires through the eyes of people who actually live there. And the time flew by, and all too soon it was time to say ciao. And we really hope we see Sandra and Jorge again soon.
We sure do. Now, we stayed at the Hilton Buenos Aires in the Puerto Madero district.
Before our trip, we almost talked ourselves out of staying in Puerto Madero. We kept hearing from other people how they described it as very unlike Buenos Aires, modern, very upscale and sterile in a way that, well, it made us concerned that we were going to be in a part of the city that just didn't feel like the real Buenos Aires.
Now, it's been in a major redevelopment zone since the late
1990s,
but it turned out to be a great choice for us. Yes, there were modern skyscrapers, a beautiful waterfront promenade, and the landmark Puente de la Mujer pedestrian bridge that can rotate to let boats pass through.
But there were also incredibly inexpensive food trucks throughout the neighborhood. They had really delicious street food.
And an amazing ecological reserve with walking trails and bike paths right next to the street food trucks.
Yeah. Oh, and one day we're walking through the neighborhood. It was right after Halloween, and a huge group of young people in costumes came roller skating right by us.
It was amazing. It was completely unexpected, and one of those travel moments you never forget. For us, Puerto Madero turned out to be the perfect home base.
And whenever we visit a new city, one of our favorite ways to get oriented is to take a walking tour. We took 3 on this trip, one in each of the 3 countries we visited.
You learn the local history, understand the layout of the city, and discover places that you might otherwise walk right past. This tour was in the La Boca neighborhood with brightly colored buildings that lead you to the stadium of one of South America's most famous soccer teams, Boca Juniors.
La Boca is a waterfront district, and there's so much more to La Boca than just the stadium. And our guide explained the neighborhood's immigrant history, its connection to the port, and he explained why so many of the homes, which were very colorfully painted, were painted with leftover ship paint. Suddenly, those colorful buildings weren't just pretty. They told a story.
And then there was the street art. Everywhere we looked, there were murals and sculptures of musicians and artists. It felt creative, it felt authentic, and it immediately challenged any preconceived notions I had about Buenos Aires.
One thing we didn't fully appreciate before visiting Buenos Aires was just how much history you encounter simply by walking around. You don't have to spend all day in a museum. The history is literally part of the city itself.
A place that really brought that home for us was Plaza de Mayo, just a 10-minute walk from our hotel. At first glance, it's a public square, not so different from numerous others we've seen around the world.
Yeah, but once you understand what happened there, you realize you're standing in one of Argentina's most important historical sites.
It's where presidents have spoken from the balcony of the Casa Rosada, the presidential mansion. It's the same balcony where Eva Perón addressed the crowds. And decades later, it became the gathering place for mothers whose children disappeared in the late 1970s during Argentina's military dictatorship.
Those women became known as the mothers of Plaza de Mayo. For decades, they've come there every week, quietly demanding to know what happened to their children.
Many of those children were never found, and we were told some of them were raised by other people. Today, they're known as the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, and they're still working to identify those children, now adults, and reunite them with their biological families. That made a real impression on me. It reminded me that history isn't always something that happened hundreds of years ago. Sometimes it's still unfolding.
And we appreciated that Buenos Aires wasn't trying to hide that history. It actually had acknowledged it. And as visitors, we came away from that walking tour with a much deeper understanding of the country than before we'd arrived.
That's one of the reasons I enjoy traveling. Sometimes you come home with a better understanding of the world. Sometimes you come home with great pictures. Buenos Aires gave us both.
Another surprise came before we even left home. We couldn't get Argentine pesos from our bank.
Our bank sells roughly 50 different currencies, including those of Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay, but not Argentine pesos.
And for some reason, our ATM cards wouldn't work anywhere in Argentina. We always like to have some currency, some of the local currency for things like tips and street food and the like.
Now, once we landed in Buenos Aires, we were able to get cash in the airport at the office of Argentina's national bank, Banco Nación, at the standard bank rate and without an exchange fee.
And we're really glad we did. So just 3 blocks away from our hotel, we found Ernesto's. It's one of those street food carts we were talking about earlier. They served one of our favorite meals of the trip. It was so good we went there twice, but it was cash only.
Their choripan was amazingly good. Choripan is basically Argentina's national sandwich. It's grilled chorizo sandwich on a crusty roll with condiments like chimichurri. Ernesto's price was 4,000 pesos, which is less than $3, and the sandwiches were huge. They had a large selection of condiments, most of which were homemade. Without cash, we would have missed one of our favorite experiences.
And 2 of our favorite meals, and if you don't know, chorizo is like the national sausage of Argentina.
Everyone knows Argentina is famous for its beef. What surprised us was that restaurants serve steaks far more well done than we're used to. I usually order my steaks rare.
And I generally like mine medium rare.
But if you aren't clear and specific, your steaks will be cooked towards the medium well level.
It'll still be delicious. It's just not probably what you were hoping for.
Before visiting Buenos Aires, we'd never heard of Mafalda. She's not well known in the United States, but in Argentina, she's everywhere.
We saw statues of Mafalda and her animated friends right in the street.
There are stores devoted to her.
Mafalda even appears on restaurant menus, like the one at Ernesto's.
She's a cultural icon. We couldn't go anywhere in Buenos Aires without seeing her.
Sandra and Jorge gave a little desktop Mafalda to Ellen as a gift.
Now she sits on my desk at home, reminding us of our cousins and our wonderful visit.
And if Mafalda is Argentina's favorite fictional character, I think Lionel Messi, maybe Argentina's favorite real-life hero.
We saw murals, posters, and tributes to him throughout the city.
Even if you're not a soccer fan, you don't have to walk around Buenos Aires very long to really get a feeling for how much he means to Argentina.
One of the things that surprised us about Buenos Aires is that you can take a day trip to Uruguay.
Yeah, I didn't have day trip to Uruguay on my bingo card, but it was really easy and it was a highlight of our trip.
You can take ferries to several places in Uruguay, but we wanted to visit Colonia del Sacramento. The boat ride took about an hour.
We purchased a round trip on the ferry that included a walking tour of the old historic district in Colonia del Sacramento. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the architecture is a mix of Portuguese and Spanish styles, and the whole package only costs $70 each.
Colonia del Sacramento has cobblestone streets,
Leafy plazas,
wonderful cafes,
cool art galleries,
great Tanat wine. That's red wine. That's basically the national wine of Uruguay.
and even classic automobiles that they've turned into giant curbside planters.
The walking tour was excellent and took us to Colonia's so-called Street of Sighs.
Our guide explained that there are several theories about how the Street of Sighs got its name, but no one really knows for sure.
We even came home with a colorful cat sculpture we bought in one of Colonia's art galleries. It now has a place in our home and reminds us of our time in South America.
One place I especially wanted to visit was El Ateneo. I'd heard it was one of the most beautiful bookstores in the world.
It was originally built as a theater, and instead of tearing it down, they transformed it into a bookstore while preserving the balconies, the stage, and much of the original architecture. It was absolutely stunning.
The stage is now home to a lively cafe.
There are chairs in the theater's boxes so you can read a book there.
It's truly magnificent. National Geographic once named it the world's most beautiful bookstore.
But something really unexpected happened while I was there. I've been trying to improve my Spanish, and standing there surrounded by books, I suddenly realized something. Maybe I shouldn't begin by trying to read difficult novels. Maybe books I had already read, or even cookbooks, would be a much better place for me to start because I already knew the stories and understand cooking terms. I walked in expecting to admire a beautiful bookstore. I walked out with a completely new idea.
That's something we love about travel. Sometimes the souvenir isn't something you buy, it's a new way of thinking.
Buenos Aires surprised us in ways we never expected.
It felt more Italian than Spanish.
More European than South American.
Had wonderful street food, great public art, and compelling stories.
And it gave us a few souvenirs that still make us smile every time we see them.
If Buenos Aires is on your bucket list, we hope some of these surprises help you enjoy it even more.
And if you've already been there, what surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your experiences.
And if you enjoyed this video, please like it and give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and click the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes.
Better living starts now.
See you next time.